This is Chapter 1 of 20. A link to the playlist will be pinned in the comments section. Do continents really represent a permanent home for all nations? Will the oceans never abandon their beds? Only a negative answer can be given to these questions. In this research, we could not fail to be inspired by Vincenzo Galileo's principle: freely question and freely answer. For those who may not know, Vincenzo was the father of famous astronomer Galileo Galilei. Many believed Troy was a mythical city that would never be found. Yet Heinrich Schliemann wandered around the northwestern coast of modern Turkey with Homer's Iliad in hand and located the legendary city. What other ancient treasures await rediscovery? Professor Hermann Oberth admitted that From the Earth to the Moon by Jules Verne led him to turn a fictitious story into rocket formulas. Later, he helped launch the United States into space. The imagination of today will be tomorrow's reality. Incidentally, Verne used his writings to encrypt important secrets, some of which relate to a hidden subterranean world. This series seeks to draw the awareness of both scientific circles and the general public to one of the greatest mysteries of our world: the lost continent of Atlantis. Atlantis was said to be a rich island whose mighty princes conquered many of the lands of the Mediterranean. Ancient tradition claims that the Atlanteans left behind precious treasures beneath the pyramids and the Sphinx. These stories are plentiful and date back thousands of years. They continue today. As recently as 2021, Erich von Däniken claimed that the Great Pyramid houses a secret library full of manuscripts that hold the secrets of our past. The idea of a time capsule left by an ancient race isn't too hard to believe. During the International Exhibition of 1964, a capsule containing 44 objects was buried in the ground in New York. These testimonies of our time were crammed with documents, memorabilia, and other typically used items of the day, all proof of what life was like in America during each respective era. Perhaps our historical ancestors did likewise, leaving priceless objects and manuscripts to future ages. In our age, where science advances in ways unmatched by the past, the moment seems ripe to probe certain unknown fields to anticipate and encourage new discoveries. This way of thinking is not new. In 1967, the United States of America and the United Arab Republic launched the Pyramid Project. The idea was to determine the presence and location of secret crypts at the Giza pyramids by subjecting them to cosmic radiation. The results suggested that unknown chambers did indeed exist in these apparently solid structures. In-depth explorations at Giza could lead to even greater archaeological discoveries in the near future. The fate of Atlantis. On Monday, August 27th, at around 10:30 a.m., a Javanese fieldworker by the name of Ahmed witnessed the Krakatoa eruption. In a second, the sky became completely black, and in the next second, I saw it all ablaze. The darkness and its rapid transformation surpassed anything one could imagine. If I insisted on it, no one would believe me. At the time, Ahmed was about 8 kilometers in the interior of the island of Java, close to the town of Merak. Try as we may, it seems impossible to imagine the terror of such an event. The island of Krakatoa, located between Sumatra and Java, was literally torn apart. The eruption tossed into the air almost 21 cubic kilometers of rock fragments alongside enormous quantities of ash, which fell back down over an area of some 800,000 square kilometers. The explosion also caused a rift in the seabed. The resulting wave rose over 30 meters high, flinging ships, both large and small, onto the coastal hills with ease. It produced what scientists believe to be the loudest sound ever heard on the surface of the planet, estimated at 310 decibels. The echo of the eruption reached as far as Australia, and the atmosphere experienced disturbances across the world. The Charles Ball went down in history as the ship that was the closest to the volcano during its most violent eruptions. The blinding fall of sand and stones, the intense darkness, interrupted only by the incessant flashes of lightning, and the continuous rumbling of the volcano all created a terrifying impression on us. W.J. Watson, captain of the Charles Ball ship. Over time, the memory of this event will fade, but it will be remembered long after in folk tales, myths, and legends. Perhaps this is exactly what happened with the legendary Atlantis. The Atlantis story has captured the imagination of adventurers, mystery seekers, and poets ever since Plato first told the story back in 360 BC. We do not know, but they know, the stones know, and remember. Devices crossed the skies, a liquid fire appeared, spread its light, the spark of life and death. By the force of the mind, masses of stones emerged. The writings kept their wise secrets, and now everything is revealed to us. Nicholas Roerich, 1874 to 1947. Although history, as we know it, is far too short to speak in terms of geological epochs, it has still passed down the memory of significant geographical changes from the past. There are no shortage of examples. The Etruscan city of Spina, which was mentioned by Pliny the Elder and Strabo as an important center of commerce and civilization, prospered for 3 centuries from around 530 BC onwards. However, it is now completely submerged by the waters of the Adriatic. Dioscurius is the city visited by the legendary Argonauts during their journey through the Black Sea. This ancient city thrived from about 3000 BC until 1100 BC, when it sank, possibly due to earthquakes or a tsunami. Phanagoria was the largest ancient Greek city on the Taman Peninsula, before it also sank into the sea in the 10th century. It is not just cities, but vast stretches of land that constantly disappear into the depths of the oceans as tectonic movements continue unabated across the Earth's surface. The tectonic plates that cover Earth like a jigsaw puzzle move roughly as fast as our fingernails grow. Still, their movements can result in tremendous upheaval as they travel across the entire planet. When we consider these facts, the sinking of Atlantis should appear perfectly plausible to us. Land sinks into the sea and emerges again in a reasonably short period. The temple of Jupiter Serapis was built in the Bay of Naples in 105 BC. After gradually sinking into the Mediterranean, it magically re-emerged from the depths in 1742. Erosion from sea mollusks appears 7 meters high on the pillars, showing how the land has sunk and risen in relation to sea level. However, it is currently sinking once again. The fortress of Caravanserai, Sabail Castle, was built on an islet in the Caspian Sea in 1135. According to some ancient chronicles, a large earthquake in the Caspian Sea submerged the castle and the island on which it was built. References to this fortress, found in old Azerbaijani chronicles, were considered to be fabrications. But in 1723, the islet rose above sea level once more and is now perfectly visible. Sabail Castle, around which only legends were wandering yesterday, has become a historical truth today. Sakina Nasirova, State Historical Architectural Museum of Azerbaijan. In Jamaica, Port Royal, which served as a long-time haven for pirates, was severely shaken by an earthquake and partially submerged by the waters in 1692. Dubbed the wickedest city on earth when it was, most chalked it up to divine wrath. During the Lisbon earthquake of 1755, the height of the waves reached 10 meters. Most of the city was destroyed and 60,000 of its inhabitants perished. Seismologists estimate the earthquake had a magnitude of 8.5 to 9, making it the largest known earthquake to hit Europe and northern Africa. The Falcon Island was discovered in the South Pacific in 1780 by Morel, a Spanish explorer. At one point, it was reported to reach heights of more than 140 meters. In 1892, the government of Tonga planted 2,000 coconut trees there, but 2 years later, the entire island disappeared into the ocean. It is currently beginning to rise again. A violent earthquake shook the Indus Delta in 1819. A vast area was flooded, and only the tallest buildings remained above the water. The quake created a high linear mound 60 to 70 kilometers long, 16 kilometers wide, and between 2 and 4 meters off the ground, stretching in an east-west direction on the flats of the Ran. Between 1822 and 1853, the coast of Chile rose by 9 meters as a result of significant earthquakes. Some 3,800 years ago, a massive tsunami with waves as high as 20 meters slammed the coastline of Chile's Atacama Desert. It was caused by a 9.5 magnitude earthquake. In the second half of the 19th century, Tuanaki Island in the Cook Archipelago sank into the Pacific Ocean with its 13,000 inhabitants. An eyewitness account of the island was provided by several fishermen who had left the island in the morning on their boats. When they returned in the evening, the entire island had disappeared. According to historical sources, at least 3 islands in the Cook Islands have completely vanished into thin air. In 1957, a smoking mountain emerged from the depths of the Atlantic, not far from the Azores, which we will examine shortly. In the same Azores, an earthquake struck St. George Island 7 years later. The catastrophe was so large that 15,000 inhabitants were forced to leave the island. St. George Island is one of the 9 islands that make up the Azores, which lie roughly 1,500 kilometers west of the Portuguese mainland. It's not only islands or shores, but entire countries that are seen to sink or rise. For instance, France sinks 30 centimeters every century, with cities such as Calais, Dunkirk, and Bordeaux impacted, as well as the French Riviera in the southeast. It is estimated that since the time of Christopher Columbus, the Andes in South America have risen by about 100 meters. The land between the Ganges and the Himalayas rises by 18 millimeters each year. The Pacific Ocean floor is pushing towards the surface in the region of the Aleutian Islands. According to Father Lynch of Fordham University, New York, a new continent is ready to rise to the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. Could this be the reappearance of the legendary Atlantis? The significance of geological changes in the ocean depths was demonstrated by technicians from the Western Telegraph in 1923 during a search for a cable in the Atlantic waters. They discovered that the cable had been lifted by the ocean floor, rising by 3,620 meters in just 25 years. If we were able to dry up the Atlantic Ocean all at once, a long mountain range stretching from Iceland to Antarctica would become visible at the bottom. Professor M. Ewing of Columbia University conducted an exploration of the ridge rising in the middle of the Atlantic in 1949. At a depth of 3,000 to 5,500 meters, he discovered prehistoric coastal sand. This was a great enigma, as sand, which is a product of erosion, does not exist at the bottom of the sea. The only conclusion that could be drawn from this discovery was that the land had sunk into the Atlantic unless, at some ancient time, the ocean waves were at a lower level. If we accepted this latter hypothesis, we would then have to ask where all the additional water would have gone. Many of the Atlantic's underwater valleys are merely extensions of existing rivers, indicating that in some places the current seabed was once dry land. In 1898, a French cable-laying ship encountered a piece of glassy lava, tachelite, at a depth of 3,160 meters, which only forms above sea level. This would mean that a volcanic eruption occurred in this spot at a time when dry land existed in place of the ocean. The Andes must have risen suddenly at a relatively recent time when people were already navigating the seas. If we reject this hypothesis, the presence of a seaport on Lake Titicaca at an altitude of 3,800 meters and 322 kilometers from the Pacific becomes completely inexplicable. The rings meant to tie ship ropes to the dock were so large that only ocean-crossing vessels could have used them. Traces of marine algae and shells are still found in this strange port of the Andes. Numerous elevated beaches can be seen, and the water in the southern part of the lake is still salty today. Equally mysterious is the megalithic port of Ponape in the Carolines. Nan Madol is a veritable Venice, rising in the middle of the ocean. The natives do not claim that their ancestors built this port. However, they speak of the Sun Kings who ruled the island and sent ships to distant lands. What was Nan Madol? Perhaps it was a vast island, most of which was submerged by water when the port of Lake Titicaca emerged. The Quechua Indians claimed that it was near Lake Titicaca that cereal cultivation began, yet maize no longer grows at such a high altitude today. All this suggests that the western coast of South America was once at a higher level. The sinking of Atlantis could have caused the rise of the Andes. Mexican explorer José García Payon found 2 huts in the Cordillera covered by a thick layer of ice. Shell traces indicated the presence of a seashore on which these dwellings had been built. Today their location is 6,300 meters above sea level. If we turn our gaze toward literature, mythology, and the folklore of antiquity, Atlantis immediately appears as a historical possibility. Plato's Timaeus and Critias contain a chronicle of Atlantis. It is attributed to Solon, a legislator of ancient Hellas, who traveled to Egypt around 500 BC. The assembly of priests of the goddess Neith of Sais, protector of the sciences, revealed to Solon that their archives dated back thousands of years, and that they mentioned a continent beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which was submerged by the waters around 9560 BC. Plato does not make the mistake of confusing Atlantis with America. He clearly states that another continent lay to the west of Atlantis. He speaks of an ocean beyond the Strait of Gibraltar and says that the Mediterranean is just a harbor. It is in this ocean, the Atlantic, that he places an island continent larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined. He tells us that, at the center of Atlantis, there was a fertile plain protected from the northern winds by high mountains. The climate was subtropical, and the inhabitants could harvest crops twice a year. The country was rich in minerals, metals, and agricultural products. Industry, craftsmanship, and the sciences flourished in Atlantis. The country was proud of its many ports, canals, and shipyards. By mentioning its trade relations with the outside world, Plato suggests the use of ships capable of crossing the ocean. The inhabitants of Atlantis built their buildings using red, white, and black stones. The temple of Plato and Poseidon was adorned with gold ornaments. The walls were made of silver, and it was surrounded by a golden enclosure. It was here that the 10 kings of Atlantis held their meetings. According to Plato's data, 1,210,000 men were involved in the army and navy. Based on this number, one would have to conclude that the entire population amounted to several million. During the last period of Atlantean history, as described by Plato, the nation was governed by the royal descendants of Poseidon. Shortly before its disappearance, the Atlantean Empire embarked on a path of imperialism, seeking to extend its colonies into the Mediterranean. However, judging by Plato's account, it seems that in an earlier time, the Atlanteans were wise and kind-hearted. According to him, they despised everything except virtue. They did not place great importance on the possession of gold or other properties, which seemed a burden to them. They were not intoxicated by luxury, and wealth did not cloud their judgment. The people of Atlantis valued camaraderie and friendship above material goods. Can we infer from this disdain for private property and their social nature that the Atlanteans already practiced a form of socialism in those ancient times? If so, this would explain the existence of a moneyless economy in the Inca Empire, as it is likely that Peru was a fragment of the Atlantean state. According to Virgil's Georgics and Tibullus' Elegies, the land in antiquity was common property. The memory of a democracy that once existed in ancient Greece and Rome was preserved in the Saturnalian and Cronian festivals, during which masters and slaves drank and danced together for an entire day. In their 5,000-year-old Enkidu and the poem of Utu, the Sumerians lament the loss of a social structure where there was no lying, no illness, no old age. Plato speaks of the moral decay of the Atlanteans, which occurred when greed and selfishness took over. It was then that Zeus, noticing that a memorable race had fallen into a sad state and that they opposed all of Europe and Asia, decided to punish them severely. According to the Greek philosopher, the men with a warrior spirit sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis disappeared in the same way, engulfed by the waters. Anticipating the skepticism of his future readers, Plato insists that his story, while seeming strange, is absolutely true. Today, his account is increasingly supported by scientific findings. Stay tuned for episode 2, where we take a close look at some of those scientific findings. Thanks for watching.